My name is Phil Gore. I work for the Vermont School Boards Association. I'm actually only in my third month with your association, but I'm not new to this work. And you'll get to know me a little bit in your first year of service, and you'll get to know me a little bit tonight. But I was a school board member in a small rural district in the Seattle area 20 years ago, and have worked in school board development for the past 15 years for the Washington School Boards Association, the National School Boards Association, and the Texas School Boards Association. And very privileged to have the opportunity to come and work in Vermont, doing similar work to what I've prepared myself for. Tonight, we'll be looking at an introduction to the role of a school board member in many ways. And I hope that each of you involved here have seen the overview of essential work of Vermont school boards. You should have received this in the mail perhaps a month or so ago, but hopefully you received that. And if not, please let us know and we'll make sure that you get a copy. This is an excellent resource. It's a proprietary model for the state of Vermont, but it's very similar to how school boards are written about and described in other states as well. I'm going to turn this to my colleague, Carrie, who will give us an idea of how some of the logistics of the webinar will work this evening. Carrie?
Hello, everyone. The first thing I'll ask is that anyone who's on, if you could please mute your microphones. It just makes it so background music or background sounds don't interfere. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what's happening tonight. Questions, as always, with the SBA, questions and comments are always welcome. You can always call our office with any questions. And tonight, if you have any questions, we like to keep them anonymous in these webinars. So when you have a question, if you could, because we're expecting a large crowd tonight, so we're not taking verbal questions, but at any time you have a question, please click on your chat and send a chat directly to me. At the bottom of the box, you'll see 2, and you want to click on that down arrow until you see Carrie Lamb, and just send it to me alone. And as we slow down for questions, I will facilitate those questions. Please don't hesitate to ask as many as you'd like. As an evaluation of this webinar, we'll send you an email either tonight or tomorrow morning that'll have 3 simple questions in it. We really ask that you respond to that and answer those questions. It only helps us to have better webinars for you in the long run. As a follow-up, you'll get, within the next few days, you'll get an email. Anyone who registers for any of our webinars will receive, following the webinar, a link to the video, a link to the PowerPoint slides, and other questions. Like if we have questions that are not answered during the webinar, if we say we're going to follow up on it, the answer will all be in that follow-up email that will go to everyone, as well as any resources that we reference in the webinars, whether they be links or other information. They'll all be in that wonderful follow-up email that'll come a couple days after. It was nice to meet everyone.
Thank you very much, Carrie. As we go along here, you'll hear about different resources that are available through your association. And this is the first of 2 webinars, really just to get things kicked off. So a week from today, and we'll mention this at the end, but we have a very important webinar that includes a lot about what to expect at board meetings, but it's really focused also on budgeting and finance and the board's role in oversight there. So again, this evening, we're looking at an introduction to school board service, and we won't touch on some of the specifics that you may have questions about, but we would certainly welcome those questions either in the chat or by email afterwards so that we can get that information to you. We're a relatively small staff as an association. There are 4 of us. Our executive director, Sue Siglowski, is with us this evening, and she'll be covering some of the content on the next several slides. Sandra Cameron, who is our director of public policy, is very involved in advocacy work as well as directing our policies. She is unable to be with us this evening. You've met me, you've met Carrie, and Carrie's the veteran. She's, I believe, 3 out of the 4 of us are former school board members, and Sandra was a school administrator. So we've got some background, some history in this work prior to coming to VSBA. But we're going to jump right into some content as we go along here. One of the things that will happen in the flow of this webinar is we're all going into breakout rooms. And so on the very next slide, we will hopefully, if all works well, we'll automatically go into 3 different breakout rooms. Sue will be in one, Carrie will be in another, and I'll be in one. And we have some questions just to kind of get things started and find out what you already know, what you're already thinking about when it comes to school board service. So these questions are, what is the role of a school board? And then pretty similar to that, what do school boards do? So what is the role of a board and what do school boards do? So we'll talk about that in different ways for 6 or 7 minutes in our breakout rooms. Carrie, does that happen automatically now? We may have to click join to get into a room. And it'll appear on our screen if things are working.
I'm having a little technical difficulty. If you could just talk for a little bit more about what these questions mean, and I will let you know.
Well, Carrie, the problem is I can talk forever. And they will be tired of hearing my voice here in the next couple of hours. Maybe not. You know, school board service is certainly commendable. We'll talk a little bit about the history of school boards as we go along. I believe it was Jimmy Carter who said, you know, serving on a school board is the purest form of community service, something very similar to that. I know that he was a school board member. Many legislators and also some Congress people have been school board members. They've served there, and they tend to have a heart for school boards afterwards. In the state where I served on the school board, one of our senators, Patty Murray, had served as a school board member, and she was known as the tennis shoe mom because when she was out campaigning, she was usually packing a kid or 2 on a hip and generally in tennis shoes. But all to say, you know, when you join school board service, you are really you're joining kind of a legacy of service in our country that predates the US Constitution as well as any of our state constitutions.
Phil, I now know why. I need to be a co-host. You are the host and I'm not a co-host. Can you make me a co-host?
Can I do that?
Yes.
Do I have the power? I have to click on participants.
Click on participants, right, and then
find Carrie
more next to my name and put co-host.
I give you the power.
Thank you so much.
All right, let's see if that works. Otherwise, they'll get.
Yes, it did.
All right.
All right, so I'm going to assign, we have 41 people here, so I'm going to put, we have 3 rooms, right?
Yes. And this is giving you some time to think about what is the role of a school board? How might that be similar or different to what school boards actually do? I did hear from one participant as we were getting started that I think she said tomorrow would be her 2nd meeting as a school board member. And so I assume others are that new as well or close to it. What is the role of a school board? We'll spend a lot of time on that. And then what do school boards do?
I'm just assigning everyone into rooms right now.
Okay. And then do you know, will we have to go ahead and click join or something like that, or we all
as soon as I open the rooms, I think it'll put you into them. The only thing I didn't check is to make sure that you're in a room.
And I'll keep talking about the webinar as we move forward. We've already covered a little bit of the introduction to school board service. But one of the emphases that's it's not brand new, but it certainly has become highlighted, is educational equity. And we want to talk about what school boards can do to support, enhance, provide educational equity. But as we do that, we'll use that as a thread to kind of examine some of the other aspects here of service, what education governance means. We'll talk a little bit about board operations and some of the common challenges that school boards have. Finally, we'll end the webinar with a bit of discussion of resources available to you for additional support and learning.
All right, here we go. I'm going to open the rooms now. Phil, if you want to go into room 1, and I will go into room 2, and Sue, you'll be in room 4. Phil, if you could text me those 2 questions, that would be fantastic. I forgot I can't see your.
Can you assign me? I just switched devices. This is
Oh,
Mary.
sure.
I'm sorry.
Sure. No problem. Just 1 second. All right, so it looks like 2 people may have come in since we left to go into breakout rooms. We're in there for 5 minutes or so. We're all going to be coming back in anytime now and having a discussion. And as soon as Phil comes back in. Looks like more people are filtering back.
You're now in the main session. Okay.
You're in the right place.
Got it. Are we all back in the main room? Or-
They're slowly coming back in.
Okay.
I
Very
think
good.
Sue's room is still open, but it looks like she's coming back quickly.
We had some pretty strong pieces of information, wisdom, even if you will, in our group. Somebody mentioned the idea that a board is a liaison from the community to the schools, and that's super important. We might say it goes both ways. The board is a liaison to the community of the schools and from the community to the schools, kind of two-directional. I like to say that school boards are stewards of the community's 2 most precious resources, right? Their children and their money. And I think that's important to remember. I also heard someone in our group mention that accountability is part of the accountability for the schools doing what they're supposed to do. And then a very strong statement. I wish that my breakout session was recorded when someone talked about ensuring that each and every child is getting an ample, adequate, high quality education. And you know that's something that's not always been on everybody's radar in the education community. And I do think boards are uniquely positioned to ensure that all of our students are getting a quality education. So the Texas Association of School Boards, where I used to work, they made a nice little animated video. About 5 or 6 years ago, we did this, and I think,
Phil?
yeah,
There's still a room that's out. I can close the room if you'd like me to.
yeah, close the room, please.
Okay.
That'll bring him back.
That'll bring them back. They have 57 seconds to come back.
Carrie didn't want anyone to miss this really cute little video.
It is a fantastic video.
It describes in a way that I think is important. For many years, I've wanted a public advocacy campaign that was something like Schoolhouse Rock. So now we'll see a distinction between people over 40 and under 40, maybe. Remember, I'm just a Bill and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. I've wanted that Schoolhouse Rock version of school board service, so that, because I think it's important, you know, not just for board members and staff to understand what school boards do, but it's important for the whole community to really understand what school boards do. So we're not quite there with the Schoolhouse Rock version yet, and I haven't seen funding to put it on Saturday morning television, but this video gets us somewhere, and we're happy to share it with you. Are folks back now, Carrie, or should I wait a few more seconds?
The timer just went off, so I think it's forcing them back now.
All right, I see some faces I saw earlier, so that's good. All right, let's watch this together. I hope it plays on your computer. It should just come through with your computer sound.
Phil, you need to share your screen.
I'm in 6th grade. I was
Yeah, we're
invited
not,
to
we can hear it, but we can't see it.
We need you to share your screen.
Got it. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Used with permission from the Texas Association of School Boards. Oh, yeah, right.
One more click back.
Generally believe in creationism.
My name is Rachel, and I'm in the 6th grade.
Yeah.
I was invited to go to a school board meeting to get an award, but I didn't know what the school board did. So I asked my grandpa Freddie, since he used to be on the board. He said, well, school boards are kind of like the grandparents of the schools.
They want good things for the students and staff. Even though grandparents aren't always around, we do our best to help you learn and grow. Let me see if I can explain it in another way. Think of the school board team as building a bridge between the community and the schools. They are your voice. Board members listen to parents, community members, school staff, and even the students about their hopes and dreams for their schools. They share these messages with the superintendent and other school leaders, and they advocate for their school district by speaking up for them with other elected officials and within the community. Another important job of the board is to provide direction for the schools. School board members choose a destination for the district. They might like the students to go to Topeka, Kansas, Paris, France, or even Mars. But they don't tell the staff how to get there. They empower the superintendent, staff, and students to choose their path. The board also makes a lot of decisions, like hiring a superintendent. The superintendent is the leader who makes sure the daily operations of the schools run well. The superintendent helps determine the best routes on the map, along with the staff and students. The school board also ensures that resources are in place so that the staff can complete their work and make sure students can reach their destinations. Let's say that the schools want their students to be able to play a musical instrument if they'd like, or fix a car, or understand algebra or other opportunities. The board makes sure that the school district has the money, staff, and materials in the right places at the right time. To ensure success, the board and superintendent team help students complete their journey in their local schools and prepare them for the future.
After talking to Grandpa Freddie, I had a much better understanding of what school boards do. They build a bridge so that the community and the schools can communicate, and they set destinations for the schools so that I can reach my goals. The school board looks out for me, just like my grandpa and grandma do.
Very good. I hope you appreciated that and kind of what went into it there. And we would underscore again that idea of the board serving as an ambassador, both from the schools to the community and also from the community to the schools, that conduit or bridge. We might also emphasize the idea of having a vision and setting clear goals for where you want the district to go. I also heard there in that video the importance of hiring a superintendent, evaluating him or her, giving them quality feedback so that they can lead the system in the direction the board wants them to go. In the book that we provided for you, The Essential Work of Vermont School Boards, if you've had an opportunity to read some of this, you'll notice that there's some outstanding writing in the first several pages. The introduction to school board service is very well done. And then this renewed emphasis on educational equity. We'll talk about that a little bit as we go along, but it intrigues me that for the last 3 or 4 decades across our country, we've been talking about closing achievement gaps, but we've made little to no progress in closing achievement gaps. So there's a laudable goal yet to be accomplished. Education governance. What is governance? How might education governance differ from other types of governance? The book outlines some important highlights of board operations and what boards do. It also delves into some of the common challenges. And you'll find that many of the common challenges of school board service are similar to challenges with any relationship that you might have. This started out as a unique experiment in democracy, but this democratic oversight of public education in our country has some inherent challenges to it. And so we'll talk a little bit as we go along. In fact, we'll get into some of that now, who the VSBA is and what VSBA as well as others might be able to offer to you and your school board. I'll turn this to our executive director, Sue Sagowski. Sue?
Thank you, Phil. And I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you to not only to this webinar, but to school board service in Vermont. And thank you very much for running for your school board, and congratulations on being elected. I'd just like to tell you a little bit about the VSBA. We are a nonprofit member association, and our members are supervisory unions and supervisory districts, and the boards within those supervisory unions and supervisory districts. And our whole reason for being really is to support all of you as you serve as school board members to be effective trustees for education in your communities. And we encourage you to contact us whenever you have a question. We're very accessible, and you can give us a call. We provide you with our cell phone numbers, so you can reach us pretty much anytime you need to, either by phone or by email. And if we aren't able to answer your question, most times we're able to direct you to someone who can answer your question. Let's go to the next slide, Phil, please. We offer various board development opportunities, and this may be the first one that you're taking advantage of, but we hope that it won't be the last. We have webinars the first Thursday of every month. We have a webinar at noon. We cover a variety of topics in the webinars. And actually in June, we're holding 2 webinars, one on June 2nd and one on June 9th. The one on June 2nd is on strategic planning, which I think a lot of you might be interested in. And the one on June 9th is about policy governance, which is one way that, one model that boards use that's a governance model. So if your board uses that or you're interested in that, that's an opportunity to learn about policy governance. But we cover all types of different topics, and most of them I think would be of interest to any school board member. The registration for those is free. There's no charge for those, and you just go to our events page on our website and sign up, and it's quite simple and straightforward. We also have regional meetings every year. We have 11 regions. The VSBA is made up of 11 regions. Those regional meetings are held usually in September and October. The last few years, we've been holding them remotely. We used to travel all around the state to do them, but because of COVID, we've been holding them remotely. They are a great opportunity to network with other board members in your region. We also provide educational opportunities at those regional meetings, and they also serve as the business meeting for your region, where you elect regional representatives who serve on the VSBA board. We also have a conference every year. This year, the conference is October 20th and 21st. And it's at the Lake Maury Resort in Fairleigh, Vermont. And that is a great opportunity to really delve into some interesting topics involving school board service, and also to meet other school board members from around the state. And then in addition to that, we offer customized board training for boards. And that can be anything that your board sees as a need it has in order to provide professional development for the board. It can include board retreats and goal setting. And so if you have identified a need for your board, the way to proceed would be to talk to your board chair and the superintendent, and they would then contact the VSBA and contact Phil and set up a time to talk about what the needs are of the board, and then go ahead and develop a specific training for your board and come and deliver it either in person or remotely, whatever you would prefer. VSBA also serves as a collective voice for school boards. There are a lot of educational policy decisions that get made every year in Vermont. They get made at the Agency of Education, at the Vermont State Board of Education, and also in the General Assembly, which we're knee deep in right now. We're getting toward the end of the session. So we try to keep you informed about what's happening at the state level with education policy. We do that in a variety of ways. We have an education legislative blog that we issue every Tuesday during the legislative session. So that's a weekly summary of what is happening in the State House regarding education bills. We also issue legislative reports. Typically we will, and those are more in depth than the blog, much more detailed. Typically we issue the legislative reports a couple weeks after the session starts. And then at the midpoint, when the legislators take their March break during town meeting week, and then once the session is completely over, we do a final legislative report. And I found those very useful to look back at. Even a couple of years later, I'll be asking myself, what year was that bill passed? And I'll be able to go back and look and see exactly when that happened and what was in the bill that passed. We also issue legislative alerts, and those are issued not very often, but when we see an issue that is very important to Vermont school boards that they may want to provide some input to their legislators about, we will issue a legislative alert and let you know and provide you with some background information so that you can then go ahead and contact your legislators and let them know how you feel about what's happening. And lastly, we usually do an annual legislative update webinar, and that would be when the General Assembly is completely done, the session's over, and we know whether the governor has signed the bills that have been passed. Then we'll go ahead and do a legislative update webinar to keep everyone informed. So the SBA Public Policy and Advocacy, we, as I said, communicate about General Assembly activities through reports, alerts, and blogs. We also serve on many different task forces, and that is by way of being appointed to serve on those task forces, generally by the legislature in a bill. When they are deciding whether they're going to make a change legislatively, sometimes they'll decide to have a study group, a working group, or a task force where an issue is looked at in greater detail, and that work group or task force comes up with a recommendation, and they'll come back to the legislature. They'll have a deadline to come back to the legislature and make a recommendation. And there are many times that the SBA gets appointed to be on those task forces to provide the perspective from a school board point of view. The other things that fall under this category are VSBA model policies. I'm sure all of you have heard that one of the main jobs of a school board is to adopt policies. Policies are kind of like, I look at them as sort of equivalent to laws. It's like the legislature has bills and laws, and school boards have policies. So what we do is we have model policies for you that you can use. You can either take them and use them as they are, or you can take them and adapt them to your district. They're divided up into 3 different categories: required, recommended, and to be considered. The required model policies really should be, if you're going to make any changes to them, that should be run by your legal counsel, because they tend to be very legalistic. The last service I'll highlight on this page is the Vermont Education Policy Service. And this is a service we provide to school boards in order to audit their policies and see whether they're up to date. and make recommendations for, whether if there's some that they're missing, we'll recommend that they adopt them, especially if they are required policies. And we can also actually do an entire policy manual for a district if they request that. That doesn't happen all that often. So we support school boards in a lot of ways, and this is really why we exist, and we love to hear from you. So please do be in touch with us. We are happy to do phone and email consultations. I am a licensed attorney in Vermont, so while I cannot provide you with specific legal advice, there are times when there are many questions that I can answer that are general. For example, general questions about the open meeting law and the public records law and Robert's rules, things like that. This is a list of our ongoing training that we provide. We've already reviewed that. We also provide you with regular email updates. We have a very comprehensive website. It has some toolkits on it that if you haven't checked them out yet, I encourage you to look at them. There's a new board member toolkit. There's the board chair toolkit and several other toolkits on there. And then we also have quite a bit of advocacy type information on there. For instance, the legislative blog is on there as well. Email updates, I should emphasize that we send out an email to our members every week. Currently, we're sending it out on Tuesdays. So hopefully you are receiving that. If you are not receiving it, please let us know, because we want to make sure that we are in touch with you and that you're hearing about all the different opportunities and also, anything else that you would need to know as a school board member. We also provide quite a few consultation services. We provide superintendent searches, and that is, facilitation of a superintendent search with a superintendent search committee of your board, superintendent evaluations, strategic planning, and also we have a consultant that we work with who can provide policy governance training to your board. Publications. We have the essential work of Vermont school boards, which Phil talked about, which I have right here as well. And we do issue periodic newsletters, and we have also the Vermont Education Law Book, which is this green book. It's not coming out very well because I think I've blurred my background, so I'm sorry about that. But it's called the Vermont Education Law Book. And we issue one every year. So it has all of the most up-to-date education laws for the state of Vermont. And it's very helpful to have one as a board member. And we do sell those on our website. Oh, we've got a chat of someone who doesn't receive emails. So Carrie, are you still on here? Can you take note of that, please?
Yes, I am. And yes, I will. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, we'll go on to the next slide. So probably you, when you decided to run for school board, you probably had the opportunity, I'm guessing, to talk with some community members. And now that you're on the board, certainly community members are going to be approaching you with comments and questions. And as school board members, you really are the connection between the community and the school. So hearing from the community, that's very important. But what do you do with the information that you receive from the community, and whose interests do you represent? Is it the constituents who elected you, or the district as an organization? Transparency and trust in governance is enhanced when board members understand the difference between representative for versus representative of. On page 56 of the Essential Work of Vermont School Boards, which is that book that you should have received in the mail, you'll find a model code of ethics for Vermont school board members. And you can also find it on the VSBA website. It covers a number of areas that are listed on one of our slides here. It covers those areas in much more depth. Once your board has discussed and agreed to adopt a code of ethics, it's important that the board member conduct that violates the code of ethics is addressed in a consistent manner. And you can find a sample process for addressing board member misconduct on page 93 of the Essentials book. I guess in closing, I would say it's important for board members to hold themselves and each other accountable so that they operate effectively, ethically, and efficiently, because your communities, and most importantly, the children and youth, are really counting on you, and perhaps they're even watching your meetings. So it's important to take a look at the code of ethics, talk about it with your board, and sort of have a plan with your board about how you're going to be consistent in addressing any conduct that is not consistent with that code of ethics. I think that I hand it back over to you now, Phil, but is there anything else you would want to say about the representative of versus representative for?
Well, that framing is very, very critical, and how you conceive of your role. While we're elected by a constituency of people to serve on a school board, ethically, morally, and for the good of the district, we find ourselves having to represent the district as a whole, not just a certain group of constituents, people that voted for us or people that we've known for a long time. And there's another conception I like to think of often, whether a board member thinks of himself or herself as a trustee or a delegate. A delegate is someone who is elected from their peers to go vote the way they're told, where a trustee is elected to go vote in the best interest of the organization, not necessarily the way their delegation or their constituents have told them to vote. And I think that's important as a new school board member to think that through. Generally, when we start school board service, we think of ourselves as a delegate, and over time, sometimes 3 to 5 years or more, we begin to think of ourselves more as a trustee and looking out for the fiduciary responsibilities and the health and well-being of the school district. It's actually a really big deal as we segue and we go a little bit further into some of the depth here of the essential work of Vermont school boards. I listed this on our website where you can download the whole toolkit. You can also get a PDF of this if you want to read it on your laptop or other device. And I would encourage you to do that. Thinking through the work of Vermont school boards, we will touch a little bit more on the history. We'll touch a little bit more about what it means to be on school board service, in school board service. But I'd like to highlight the importance of equity work and thinking of it as such. I know that the animated video we saw earlier referred to the superintendent as the leader of the school district, but I would like to think that each and every one of us are leaders of a school district, and that the board as a whole has to figure out how to lead. We learn a little bit through life about how to lead as an individual. It's a bit more complex to figure out how we lead as a group. In other words, how we build consensus, how we build goodwill, how we maintain that, and we bring an organization forward. So I thought about in this rest of this webinar, really weaving through the tapestry of all the things that boards need to do. How do we lead for educational equity? How do we lead in a way that produces improved success for all students and closing gaps in achievement at the same time? And to me, that's really the secret sauce. One of my former bosses used to say that the rabbit that I was chasing. How can a board help promote improve student outcomes for all students, and at the same time closing gaps for students that truly have been left behind? Well, let's back up and talk just a little bit about education governance in Vermont. You'll find this in the book in pages 4 through 6. The United Nations, and I apologize, that's my dogs in the background. The United Nations Education Committee has developed what they think of as education governance. And I like all of these words. I started trying to highlight some or underline some, and I've done that in my paper copy, but all of these words are important. And I want you to think about structures and processes. One of the things in school board service that we don't inherently know, but we have to come to understand, everything has a process. And this is not like we're a sole proprietor or we're the owner of a mom and pop shoe store, grocery store, bakery. Typically across the state of Vermont, public education is the largest entity, often the largest employer, the largest budget, and the largest scope in our towns and in our communities of responsibilities and of impact. So as a board member, we have to begin to think with a systems thinking hat. We can't just think of, well, I'm going to go cut some firewood, so I get the axe or the chainsaw or the maul and I go do what I want to do. Everything about the school system is interdependent on the other pieces of the system. You may read a report somewhere that says, well, high school students would learn more and better if they didn't come to school until 9 or 10 o'clock. And that may be an interesting topic for a school system to engage in a conversation about, but realizing the impact on class schedules, bell schedules, busing, food service, how that impacts middle schools, junior highs, elementary, preschool, parents, like it all has to be taken into the whole system. Back to and I may have to go shut a door here. I didn't anticipate that. How bad is the dog barking? Can you hear me? Or is the dog barking overwhelming? I don't know if anyone can hear me.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Yeah, I didn't anticipate this. Let me see if I can solve the problem.
Okay, if you've left a message for me in the chat, just so you know, I'm answering everyone as quickly as I can. If you've put your name in the chat and said you've not received either the emails or the books, I will definitely be following up with you tomorrow. I do have a big batch of them I'm putting in the mail tomorrow, just so that y'all know.
Thank you for trying to cover for me there, Carrie, too. I know she's glad it's not her dogs barking in the background, but I'm in a little unique situation this evening. I won't get into, but all to say I've got my daughter's dog here too. So we heard these words hopefully in our breakout sessions a little bit. I know Sue has mentioned the word accountability. Transparency has been very important. As a public entity, we begin to recognize, and perhaps even you ran for a school board, partly because of responsiveness. Sue underscored the rule of law and the fact that within a school district, policies stand up in court, just like a town ordinance or a county ordinance would hold up in court. And one of the things that the courts will look at first is, did the system follow the policy that they had in place? We recognize governance includes a stability. We could probably do a whole webinar, at least an hour or two, on how important it is for the system to be stable enough to be able to move forward. In fact, research shows quite conclusively that the less turnover there is on the board and the less turnover there is in the superintendency, the more likely student achievement is going to be improving in a district. Equity is a mission and it's a challenge. I hope that most people here on the webinar see equity as a calling that you're trying to accomplish in your school system. Good governance promotes inclusiveness and a broad-based participation. It's important, and I heard this in my breakout group, that it represents the norms, values of the community and brings those to the school system. We probably can't say enough about culture and what an important role the board has in overseeing, establishing, and maintaining a healthy culture and environment that represents citizens and stakeholders and always has the best of students at heart. I was working with a board about 8 years ago, and they had 6 superintendents in 5 years. It was not hard to look at them and say, you don't have a superintendent problem. That was the easy kind of low-hanging fruit, as they say. But it wasn't until the end of that 3-hour workshop when the board chair looked at me and looked at her colleagues and said, we have a culture problem here, and the culture is us. When a school board takes that kind of radical responsibility, great things can begin to happen for kids. When there's drama in the boardroom, there will be chaos in classrooms. And research is conclusive from coast to coast on this. Everywhere you've got drama happening in the boardroom and board members are fighting or fussing with each other, you see a decline in student achievement by any measure. So as we think about school board service, again, there is a rich history here, a tradition that predates our Constitution. As early as the 1600s, Massachusetts formed school committees, and they had the first semblance of school boards in the country. Vermont has had school boards around in some form or another since the 1700s. And I think you'll really appreciate this section in the book. I know that I have, because it sort of mirrors challenges that we still have today. This idea of public partnership. So just like your school board meetings, this is very important. If you just took this one takeaway away tonight, it would be worth the price of admission. School board meetings are not a public meeting. They're a meeting of the school board conducting business of the district that is held in public. Open meeting laws were created across the country so that decisions about what happens in the public's interest are not all made behind closed doors. In a lot of states, they're called sunshine laws because the idea was we're going to shine light on what our elected officials are doing. But at the same time, the board has been charged and tasked not only by legislative mandate, but by the local electorate to oversee and govern the school district. So what does partnership look like? And as the ebb and flow of partnership with the public kind of comes and goes, one of the critical things that we know about what's best for kids is that kids do better when the community is heavily engaged in what's happening in the school system. In fact, research over the last 3 to 4 years has shown conclusively that the more the board engages the community in the board's work, the more likely that districts and systems are going to be improving achievement for all and closing gaps. So again, how do we find the equity? Well, we find the equity when all voices are heard. In the book, you can read about kind of the reforming of education, its ebbs and flows. Consolidation has been an ever ongoing concern, certainly since the invention of school buses, when people were not simply walking or riding a horse or riding in a horse and buggy to school, but there were motor carriages and buses that were developed to transport students. People began to try to consolidate and try to maximize resources, efficiencies generally. The advent of the superintendency, what we call a school superintendent today, that position did not exist in hardly any area of our country 150 years ago. And most of our country, it wasn't until about 100 years ago that school systems began hiring superintendents. Again, that speaks to the professionalization and then kind of the consolidation that comes out of that. We're always in this push-pull with trying to balance centralization and localization. It's very tough because in some places you hear a lot about global society, global economy, and that's a thing that's really happening. But ask yourself this question: where, when, and how do we educate children for a global society? We do that locally. And so how do we hang on to that sense of place-based learning, taking advantage of our environment through outdoor education, opportunities that are available to us inside the school building and right outside the school building, as well as within the broader community? How do we take advantages of that? In the book, you'll read about some funding challenges. I think we'll have updates to funding challenges at the end of this legislative session. But know that funding challenges for public education have been around since the beginning of public education. There's always challenges with equity when it comes to distributing resources across the state, and oftentimes even within a town. And so just know that those challenges are there. We encourage you to learn all you can about education funding and how things work, and then choose to be a part of a solution, because any of us can sit back and complain, but it takes leadership to step forward and make something different happen. We're going to try breakout sessions just one more time, and we'll go there for 7 minutes again, and hopefully come right back into the broader room. In my work in education governance and education leadership, it's become critical to me that we focus on this core question: how are our students doing? There's no end of adult drama. There's no end of need of teachers, needs of staff, needs of administrators, egos and needs of board members, community members, parents. And that can, if we're not careful, all of that need can overwhelm us to miss the fundamental question: how are our students doing? I've had some very poignant moments in the last 15 years of working in school board development where all of these concerns and challenges can come every which direction for a board. But ultimately, it's when we get down to that question: how are the students doing, and how are we affecting how the students are doing? You'll notice within this, very intentionally, these nested circles, the diagram, students are at the center. Who they are holistically as a person, as their development, their ego, their health, their nutrition, everything about them. We know that students' needs have to be met. Their basic Maslow's hierarchy kind of needs. They got to be able to breathe and drink enough water and have shelter and safety in order to learn. And that's all kind of enshrouded in student well-being as well. This happens within our school systems in a certain culture and climate, a culture and climate that I would say the school board has ultimate responsibility for. It's not the teachers, it's not the administrators, it's not the superintendent. It's not just the bus driver, the nurses, the cooks, the paraprofessionals, the custodians, all of these people, the admin professionals who really run things, right? It's not all about them. The school board has to take radical responsibility for the culture and climate in their district. They serve fundamentally, and school boards were created to ensure there were enough resources to do what needs to be done to educate students. And in this broader context of community engagement and support, I think, that book title, It Takes a Village, nowhere is that more important, more evident than when it comes to public education. It really takes an entire community to enshroud and build a learning community, if you will. So these are our 3 questions, and I would like to, my mission in my work in Vermont is that every school board member in the state can answer these 3 questions with some specificity. How are our students doing? What are we doing to improve student learning? And how will we know we're making progress? Carrie, can you just flip a switch and stick us in 3 groups?
Yes, I can. And Phil, you're going in room 1 again?
Okay.
We're going to go to the same rooms. I'm opening the rooms now.
Are we supposed to be having a conversation?
I think she's supposed to be moving us.
Oh, I thought we are in the breakout room, right?
3 groups and 40 plus people, so probably not, unless
Oh.
she's putting people in.
Were you able to get into the last group meeting? Because I got kicked off the last group meeting.
I came on late personally.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I don't know.
I'm gonna send Carrie in.
I wonder if the person you're trying to message, I don't think is in here, right? So I don't know if they get your message.
Mm.
So maybe it is just us. So okay. Do we want to just try to answer whatever questions they had posed since we're here?
Sounds good.
Okay. Was question number 1 about like how to make students feel supported? I think that's what I remember from question number 1.
Can't hear Heather.
Oh, I just was asking, is that what the question was for question
I
number
can't hear Heather Chadwick, I was saying.
Got it.
Sorry. No, I was just saying, I think the first question was, how are students doing? But I was saying I don't think I can answer that question just because I've only been on the school board for 3 meetings. So I don't know how, as a school board, to reflect how students are doing. I have 2 students in our school system. And, from what I can see with just the press, just through looking at my kids and their friends in the school, they seem to be doing really well, all things considered. But
Our district has a report back. I'm in with Washington Central Unified. We get a report back to U32 middle high school representatives on what's going on at the high school level, which really gives us kind of some flavor for how they're doing from kind of from the social emotional standpoint more than anything else. And then what we get, I'd say, is upon request from our principals at the elementary level. And like you, Heather Chadwick, I'm often relying either on what I'm hearing from people who may be reaching out to me, which is pretty minimal, about how they feel like their own kids are doing, or from my own child.
Oh, we found some more people. So I have a different role. I do 2 things. So I'm on the school board for Heartland Elementary. And I'm also a high school math teacher in Windsor at Woodstock Union High School. So I see both, like both things. And so students being, I think it's rough I'm finding that 9th grade is really rough. 9th grade's having a rough go at it. And it seems like right now, people at Heartland were saying that they're doing SBAC testing And because it's the third graders' first time ever doing it, there's like a lot of struggle going on right there, with kids really, I guess, having a hard time and giving everybody a hard time, I think. So
Did the four of you not get into a room? Were you not assigned to a room?
Yeah, we didn't get into a room.
Very sorry. I realized when I came back that there was the four of you were at the top of the list. I'm very sorry about that, but you got to have the discussion between yourselves. I can go ahead and share the questions if you want to check and see if you were able to hit all of the questions here.
We were just getting started, Carrie, when we realized we were on.
We realized you were left behind. I'm very sorry. So how are your students doing? What are we doing to improve student learning, and how will we know we're making progress? So we're glad to have that conversation. The group that's just returned, and it looks like we just got someone new in as well. I think that's our last breakout session, but if any of you like to share your feelings, be glad to talk about it. All right. Some of the answers that we got in our room, does anyone want to share some of the things that we talked about in our room? It's just us and the other five, if you want to share anything about monitoring, or a couple, I think, of districts were doing community. Oh, forgive me, I think I said that wrong. You're doing community surveys, is that what it was? Or climate surveys, is that what it was?
Mhm.
Yes, climate surveys.
Yeah, they were talking about doing panorama surveys of our district did it with the parents, but it sounds like the other person, they did it with the kiddos. And then working with the director, the curriculum director.
Great. Well, everyone else has 45 seconds to join us, and then we'll be moving on with the presentation from Phil.
And I may have gotten ahead of my group there in the making back, but I know we're all coming soon, right?
Here we all come. We have 3 seconds until the breakout rooms close.
All right. I think everyone is back or really close to it. Hopefully these questions were difficult. Hopefully there's not just sort of a one size answer. How are our students doing? What are we doing to improve student learning? And how will we know that we're making progress? My group got to this. There's multiple different indicators. The importance of these questions is not just for here and now. The importance is for you as a full board and as a board team to be able to grapple with, how do we know how our students are doing? What is our district doing to improve how they're doing? And how will we know what we're making progress? You'll see that starts to set up some vision and goal setting that can be specific and measurable, right? I heard folks talk about different anecdotally. We know some schools are doing well, other schools are not doing well. We know about dropout rates, graduation rates. We may know about some things, but it's very important for the board to figure out what data do we need to have to ensure that we're making progress. We've been selected from our communities to oversee the outcomes of public education. And how will we know whether our public education system is successful or not is really critical. And that gets us back to this idea of educational equity. We've got just a few pages in the book, maybe 10 or so, that are dedicated to this. And you'll notice in the reading and the voice in these pages, it's not as tight and crisp as the last chapter was. It's a bit more of a work in progress because, frankly, none of us have figured out how to attain educational equity. There are laws that have been passed, there's funding that's been allocated, but it truly is a challenge to figure out how do we educate each and every child and do that in an equitable way. I want to suggest to you that it requires leadership. Somebody has to step up and say, the buck stops here. And I would suggest to you that that needs to be your board as a whole, that the responsibility for ensuring the educational equity of students in your district is a board responsibility. Yes, teachers have a role, principals have a role, the superintendent has a role, everybody has a role, but ultimately the school board has been assigned and tasked with overseeing and holding the public school system accountable for educating children. There are no end of needs when it comes to educational equity, but there are some opportunities and there's some available tools. You'll find some sample policies, discussion about what critical race theory really is, not just what the political or media pundits would have to say about it, but what it really is. You'll find some resources in the toolkit that can be helpful to you in this way. You'll also find, if you come to the VSBA annual conference, you get engaged, involved in the other activities of your association, you'll find colleagues across the state that are grappling with these issues and making progress. And so it's important to have that professional network, if you will, in your school board service, people that can share with you best practices, some promising practices. There are districts across the state that have been hiring DEI directors, directors for diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are many districts that are adopting or considering equity policies. I saw a beautiful equity policy just a couple of weeks ago here in Vermont. And so all to say, these resources and tools are available if you begin to seek them out. And I would encourage you to do that. You've heard the expression, if we do what we've always done, we'll get what we've always had. That's actually really not true. If you go buy a car today and you put gas in it and you change the oil every 5,000 or 6,000 miles, whatever the book recommends, you'll find that over time, that car will actually give you less performance 10 to 15 years from now than what it gave you today. And I think a lot of our systems are kind of that way. They're stretched where we've been trying hard. We've been doing more. We've been working. We've been trying to do what we've done, but it's not getting different results. And that's where leadership comes in. So on this subject, very importantly, kind of a definition of educational equity. And this is from the Center for Educational Research. And on the NSBA site, you can find this. There's a URL there. Equality versus equity. Equity in education is achieved when students are all treated the same and have access to similar resources. Equity is achieved when all students receive the resources they need so they can graduate prepared for success after high school. I would encourage you to think deeply about this question. Are the students coming out of your system? And I know some of them that might be 6th grade or 8th grade. And for many of you, it's probably 12th grade. Are the students coming out of your system, are they prepared to be successful in what's next? And ask yourself, if we're graduating students, whatever level, right? If students are leaving our system and they're not ready for what's next, what are you doing as a school board and as a system? Whose responsibility is it to ensure that each and every child is ready for what's next? Whether that's college, whether that's trade schools, whether that's a job, whether that's joining the military or the Peace Corps or some other endeavor, if they're not prepared for what's next for them, whose responsibility was that? It was the guardians of the system. So what does it take to have effective education governance? We've got right at 40 pages in the book that are dedicated to this. You'll find any model of education governance. I've got a book here beside me, a couple books. I'll just recommend, I'm going to mention the one that I co-edited a few years ago. It's called Improving School Board Effectiveness, a Balanced Governance Approach. My friend Tom Alsbury and I, we put together a compilation of the latest research on what school boards do that make a difference for kids. And the first chapter in that book is all about a multi-state study that spanned about 12 to 14 years, known as the Iowa Lighthouse Research Project. And all of these models on what constitute great governance really start with some, however it's worded, some sense of a compelling vision, right? There has to be a vision for what is possible. A book that came out just 3 years ago on this topic is called The Governance Core. I highly recommend this. You can find it easily online by searching for those words, The Governance Core. It's co-authored by an education leadership professor from Canada, Michael Fullen, and the former executive director of the California School Boards Association, Davis Campbell. It is a brilliantly woven together book that I think is really the best book I could recommend to a school board member, veteran or new. But they talk about the moral imperative and what we might call your why. What compels you to serve on a school board? What keeps you there at the table? And eventually we all go through this cycle of feeling like we're not really making a difference. Those resources I'm mentioning to you can help you get a grasp early on and throughout your school board service of how school boards can really make a difference. Again, that's starting with why. In our first breakout session, hopefully your group mentioned the word policy at some point. School boards govern and oversee their districts. They do that through policy. While the board collectively, if you're hiring a superintendent, so a supervisory union or supervisory district, the board is the person who hires, evaluates, or the entity who hires and evaluates, oversees the work of the superintendent. That's not, can't be overly hierarchical. For one reason, there are at least 5 people in every situation in the state, I believe, that are collectively the supervisor of the superintendent. And in many systems, it's a much larger number than that. So you're one voice of several. This has to have a partnership to it. It's not, it just doesn't work. And I've seen this, and hopefully no one here in the meeting has ever done this. I've seen new school board members that go through schools and say, oh, now I'm your boss, and I'm your boss, and I'm your boss, and I write your paycheck. Well, no, we don't. We're one of a collective. And as school board members, we have no unique authority over and above any other citizen, except when we're at the dais in a meeting that's been properly noticed and called, and we're following our policies and procedures to do business for the district. So there really has to be this sense of partnership with the superintendent. How do we hold him or her accountable is a critical part of that partnership. When we have a clear vision, we can develop clear goals. Clear goals are measurable. We will know how the students are doing because we're looking at data that gives us indicators of student performance. And in that student performance or evaluation of how is the district doing, It makes it easy to evaluate the CEO of the district, the superintendent, because we have data that shows us this is how our system is doing. A critical role that we won't talk much about this evening, obviously, is budget and financial oversight. We have a webinar scheduled a week from now on this very topic. It'll be an interactive webinar with multiple presenters, but very importantly, an overview of school finance and what that looks like in our state. It's critical, and I can't say this enough, that the board monitor progress and performance. We each need to be able to have a conversation with our neighbor across the fence, or wherever we go, whatever social group, our families and friends that we're acquainted with. We need to be able to talk about how are our students doing? How are they doing in every way? But very importantly, what is our system doing to improve how they're doing? And how will we know we're making progress? We can't monitor performance if we don't know what progress looks like. So those are conversations. And again, I say these to you as new board members. You want to go home and have these conversations with your full board, or at least with your board chair. How do we know how our students are doing in our district? Would be a really fundamental and great curious question. How will we know? Sue mentioned the idea of a code of ethics. This is very important. Obviously, the board needs to operate in an ethical manner. That certainly includes transparency, accountability, responsiveness to the public. And at the same time, the board has some legal responsibilities. You will find that getting on a school board is not one of the smartest ways to win friends and influence people. If you haven't found that already, you will have to be a part of decisions that are not necessarily favorable to someone who has been your friend or your colleague or your coworker, because you'll have some legal responsibilities and parameters. I would really encourage you this year, and this is critical, take a look at the webinar that we have on our website about the open meeting law. This really should be a requirement for service. We know what the open meeting law says, and we feel a sense of duty and responsibility to follow those laws. That those laws were created for a reason, so the public could know and understand what was happening in their district. You'll be privy to both confidential and privileged information. You'll get information in closed sessions that it is illegal for you to talk about, even with your spouse or your partner. You'll get information that it might not be illegal, but it would certainly be inappropriate for you to talk about with someone else. Some examples of that might be domestic problems that staff are having, or critical health issues that some staff, parents, or children may have. You'll be given privileged information that is entrusted to you, and it really becomes critical that as individuals and as a board as a whole, that we maintain high ethical and legal standards, which sometimes means there's things we just can't talk about. People may want to know why a coach wasn't renewed. They may want to know why that a certain teacher was disciplined or let go. They may want to know even what happened with a student, but it would be unethical or illegal to share that. So I would encourage you just to kind of be mindful of that, and know that that comes with the territory. Sometimes, again, we're part of decisions that are not necessarily popular, and we can't always give all of the rationale for why a decision was made by the board that was made. We have about 20 pages in the book that are dedicated to board operations. These are all important. I don't know, but I would assume out of 40 people or so participating in the webinar right now, that some of you could currently be a board chair, that can happen very early on. There are some extra responsibilities and no real extra authority of a board chair. And so we would encourage you to dig in and learn that role well. We encourage school boards to, pick the person to be board chair who's going to do the best job. They have time and they have the leadership skills to to bring the board together. The board needs to have goals. The board should have a goal, at least 1 to 3 goals for itself, what the board will do to improve this year, and then some sense of annual work plans. I mentioned in the books you can find on governance, they've all got this continuous improvement model. It starts with a vision, and the vision helps the board to develop goals for the system. And the goals are measurable so they can be monitored. And it doesn't matter what words you use. It really is sort of a plan, do, check, act, right? So the board needs to plan its work, be intentional about it, what it's trying to do. And at the same time, then they need to execute on their plan. We encourage the use of a board calendar. So you know throughout the year, these are the topics coming up, and that's really, really helpful for new board members. Having those work plans and then revisiting, okay, how did we do? How are we doing? I'm going to share with you on the next slide, and then Carrie will include this in a follow-up email as a PDF that you can see a little bit better and refer to. So the supervisory unions, those systems that are hiring a superintendent, they have a moral responsibility and a fiduciary responsibility to evaluate the superintendent every year. And I would encourage that boards have an ethical responsibility to do a self-assessment of how are we as a board doing. One of the things to look at is how are our board meetings? What are we doing as a board? And this might be a question for you to ask your board chair at some point in the next couple of weeks. When was the last time we did an annual board self-assessment? Or when was the last time we sat down as a team and we just talked about how we're doing as a district? I think that's really something that you can encourage. And sometimes it's the new members that see these things that are missing. And if you've joined a school board where a majority of the members have been on for a long time, it's easy for us to take these things for granted after a while. But the board should be asking itself, how are we doing as a board? One way that boards can do that is at the end of each meeting, sort of take a turn with assessing how did this meeting go? And it can really be that simple. But you might ask 3 or 4 questions. Were all voices heard? Did everyone get a chance to speak that should have had an opportunity to speak? Were the materials presented to us prepared well in advance so that we could read them and understand and ask thoughtful questions? And you might have, like I say, just 3 or 4 questions. Were we respectful? Did we honor the duties and responsibilities of our job? And did we show respect to everyone concerned in this meeting? Those are good, thoughtful questions. And it gives the board a chance to model the type of reflective practice that you want teachers and students to be having in the classrooms, right? We know that reflection, self-reflection is a key to learning, and it's a key to improvement. So you'll find some helpful tips here in the book about communications. A lot of our systems across the state have different committees of the board. And then you'll find the last page in that section highlights the idea of student board members, student representatives to the board, or student board members. I highly encourage that. I can tell you from personal experience, when we added students to our board, and we had 2, we had a high school junior and a high school senior, you can't make this up. All of a sudden, it was like we all sat up straighter. Even the superintendent. We had a little audience, and they were watching us. And you know what it's like when kids are watching you, in that sense of responsibility to behave. Well, that was there. But even maybe more importantly than that, it caused us to change the way that we communicated at the dais so that we were explaining what we were talking about. And you've already hit this if you've been to one meeting. All the ridiculous education E's, the ABCs of education, right? All these different acronyms and words that are just like, where did these words come from? Every industry has its own language, right? And education is certainly no exception. And a lot of that gets passed down or connected from legislation at the federal and at the state level. But there's a lot of words that if we're going to have an effective public conversation, we need to unpack them and explain them. So I found that as a board member, having students at the dais beside of us helped us have more common English conversation. And if you've ever been in a board meeting where angry patrons, whether it's parents, whether it's a vendor, whether it's a business person or some other community member, even staff, right? If you've been at a board meeting where you've got people there that are there to tell off the board, it's really hard for them to do that when students are sitting right there beside you. It just helps elevate the behavior and the conversation of all concerned. So probably can't say enough about student representatives. I just think it's a brilliant addition to any board. This is a group of team correlates. This was adapted from 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and a text that's been out for 20 years or more. This is something we'll make available. It's been adapted, and Carrie can help me make sure that we give credit to the source on this when we send it out separately as a PDF. But this provides a rubric that a board can look at just based on these 5 different correlates of high functioning teams: trust, communication, commitment, accountability, and results. And you'll see that the rubric, it kind of grows across to where we're not really doing this at all, or we're doing this to a great extent. And we want to make that available as a resource to you. So, common board challenges. We've talked about some of these as we went along. One of the challenges that boards can have is if somebody is violating closed session or executive session rules and laws. Another issue that seems to be common is handling complaints that come. This is super important for new board members, because when we're a new school board member, people will want to come and tell us their complaints, their gripes, their criticism. All along the way, they will want to kind of pull us into their concern. And they may feel like that a veteran member who's been there for a while and has already heard from them, or has been what they think of as part of the problem, might not be as conducive to ready to listen. Let me tell you about a couple of things to avoid. One is, you're not elected to be the customer complaint department. And if you find yourself taking on the role of customer complaint department, your phone will be ringing off the hook. Your email inbox will be exploding if word gets out you're the board member to complain to about what's happening in the system. That's one pitfall, right? Probably a more important and just really legal pitfall is that if a customer comes to you, and I'm very intentionally using the word customer, because our districts and our supervisory unions, they're made up of multiple different constituents, some of which have students in the system, some that are students, some that are staff, and some that don't. A customer complaint is a complaint about something specific that a parent or a child has experienced within the school system. That's different than just a general community member's complaint. If you listen to somebody tell their version of the story all the way through, and then the board ends up having to sit and serve in a quasi-judicial function to adjudicate whether or not the administration has handled the complaint correctly, you would ethically need to recuse yourself from that conversation and that vote because you've easily already been biased. And this is something we all have to learn as new school board members, that we care about people, we care about what their concern is, but there's a proper process for helping them solve their problem. I saw a sticker on someone's desk years ago. I love to help people with problems. And one of the things underneath that was, so at no time will your problem become my problem, because I love to help people with problems. So you can't take someone else's problem and let it become your problem, but you can help them solve their problem. And the way to do that is to direct them to the point closest of concerns. A lot of times it's a complaint or a criticism about somebody on the front lines, whether that's a teacher or a bus driver or a paraprofessional. It's somebody that's in the school day in and day out. And as board members, we need to ask the question always, have you talked to that person about the problem? And then every system has a chain of command, right? Everybody in the system has a boss. The board has the voters as a boss, and the superintendent has the board as a boss, and principals have the superintendent as a boss, and teachers have the principal as a boss. And teachers have responsibility in a classroom for classroom management. So maybe not the boss of the students, but certainly the caregiver and caretaker of the classroom. Everybody's got somebody to give a report accountability to. And when we can direct people to the closest source that can solve their problem, they're way more likely to have their problem solved and with less drama. If they say, well, I've already talked to the teacher and she or he wasn't helpful, have you talked to the principal, right? Now, it's important, again, that you not become biased in hearing a concern. Most systems, and you could talk with your board and superintendent about this, most of the time there's an agreement that boards will let their superintendent know if they're hearing a concern so that he or she can be aware of that. Well, what if you have a complaint or a problem with one of your fellow board members? If you serve on a board for any length of time, this will happen. The best advice, the best wisdom that we can offer, talk with that person as a human being. And when somebody does something that is offensive or it just disturbs you in whatever way, a majority of the time, not all the time, but a majority of the time, if you go to that person and you bring sort of a posture of humility and you ask questions that are open-ended, help me understand what was happening last night when you said this about her, and I didn't understand why you would say that. If you can come to people and sort of keep your own emotions in control, most of the time a one-on-one conversation will resolve the problem. And when that doesn't, what you don't want to do as a board is involve the superintendent in being the police or the babysitter for other board members. That doesn't end well. The board needs to figure out how to manage the board. So if the problem was not with the board chair, you might go to the board chair and say, hey, I think we've got an issue. And then again, that humility that says, this might just be me. Help me understand if I'm not seeing this right. There are proper ways to address board conduct, and I would encourage you to read these few pages in the book, figuring out how to make group decisions, knowing that it's not necessarily the best thing if the board always votes unanimously, but it can be very well-serving for the board to have a vigorous debate, and sometimes not all vote the same. Sue, help me out here.
We have a question I thought you might want to answer in the chat. It is asking if we can send the questions out that you refer to about board self-reflection.
Yes, absolutely. Whether it was those that I said or sharing that resource that Carrie shares with you, we'll make sure that the proper notation is there for the crediting the source and any other information on that. But yes, please. Everything I'm saying here this evening is things that I think would be a healthy conversation for the whole board. And again, a lot of times it's the new members that are able to, see what's missing and help drive improvement. So that's great. Sue, thank you for bringing that question forward.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So it's been said that you can delegate, what's the right word? You can delegate responsibility, but you can't, no, I'm saying that wrong. I might need someone to help me. You can't delegate responsibility. You can delegate authority. That was the word I was looking for. You can delegate authority, but you can't delegate responsibility. That's really important. Ultimately, the board is responsible for what happens in the school system. And you hire a superintendent who hires principals and staff to provide high quality education for each and every child. And you need to, as a system, hold the system accountable for results. It's a common board challenge to fail to hold the system accountable for results. And systems get what systems produce. So for those of you that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen in just a moment. I've got some reflection questions here. And I wonder, some of you were pros at this, and you've probably got the answers already, but I'm going to stop my share and ask these questions in just reflection. So for those that are comfortable, if you'd like to turn your camera on and maybe unmute your mic if it's muted. Is there someone that would take a stab at that first question in one sentence? What is the role of a school board? And I had a couple of ringers in my breakout room, so they had the answers early on.
I did too, Bill. They
Yeah.
did great. Yeah.
Someone maybe that wasn't a ringer, but you're thinking now I got it. They're like a grandpa. How would you describe that? In one sentence, what is the role of a school board?
When we were talking in our group earlier, I liked when it was called a bridge between the school and the community.
Very nice.
To exude confidence.
To exude confidence. That is an important role.
Thank you.
To care about all the students and their educational experience.
Good. I was about to call on one of my ringers. Deborah, is your mic unmuted?
Am I unmuted?
Now you are.
Okay. To guarantee that each and every student has a healthy, successful educational experience that takes them into the future.
Love it. Yep. You and I need to do some writing together. It truly is the board and only the board that can ensure the success and outcomes of each of the students. They don't do that directly. They do it indirectly, but they ensure it. So we're hearing some of these three important things all board members should do. What are three important things or one important thing that all school board members should do? Maybe we didn't really cover that enough tonight, but you already know. What are three important things all school board members should do?
Listen.
Got one. Thank you.
Mhm.
One more.
Model good behavior.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Role model.
Mhm.
One more. Or
Speak
two.
with one voice.
Speak with one voice. Yeah. Important for the board.
Self-evaluate.
Self-evaluate.
Mhm.
That's good. Individually and collectively. It's good. Anyone, what are you thinking differently than you were at the start of this webinar? Anything kind of prompt you to think differently than what you did a couple hours ago? Nellie?
I'm kind of surprised that teachers don't figure into providing equitable education for students in kind of caring way that I was expecting they should be.
And I would think that you'll find some that do and some that don't have that awareness or that priority or drive yet. That's why it becomes important that the board leads the way. There's a lot more I could say about that topic, and I'm trying to hold it back because we'll run out of time.
So I'm assuming that we were all elected in March. Is that correct? Statewide? No, because I see people shaking their heads no. Oh, so were people elected very recently?
Some in my group mentioned that they had been on the board for a while, but then decided to be a part of this webinar.
I guess what I mean is this new tour of duty. It's basically since March, isn't it?
Most people.
Yeah. So then I would suggest that the VSBA push to do this kind of training months earlier than now. I've been doing the job for quite a while. And whatever we're getting out of this training, I wish it had occurred earlier. I wish I had received the book, within a week or two of being elected. That would have been very helpful.
Thank you for that input. That's good to hear. Anyone else? Anything that you're thinking differently than what you were a few hours ago? Elliot?
Yeah, the question that you asked about how do we know how the students are doing, and I just assumed we'd be getting the information we needed, and maybe we have to be thinking about it on our own to make sure we are getting all the answers we need.
Yeah, that's good. And every system, it will vary. The data that's available and what the vision is that the board has had, the system has had for how how the students are doing. That's, celebrate local control. We have some resources, and we'll continue to, bring out those resources on ways that boards can know, but ultimately it will be a very local decision. Are you focused on graduation rates? Are you focused on test scores? Someone mentioned earlier, student discipline and discipline referrals was important in their system. So locally determined indicators of success for how and it's not a pull out a worksheet and that's done in 10 or 15 minutes. It really is a conversation with the full board, determining, first of all, what is most important to us as a board, and then how will we know whether we're making progress. I do want to highlight on this, in this vein, some additional resources just are available. And let me see if I can share that again. There is a complete new board member toolkit on our website. One of the things that you can help encourage in your system is that for the board to take responsibility for onboarding new members in a healthy way. This book that I mentioned earlier, they devote a whole chapter to that. How do you bring a new board member up to speed quickly? Chapter 4 in the governance core talks a lot about that. And one of the things would be that, new board members who are elected long before your state association even knows who they are or has an email address for them. Locally, there are people that know who you are and have that contact information. So to get the new board member toolkit quickly, right? A board chair, superintendent, superintendent's admin professional would be in a key place to get that to you right away, and new board members in the future. The essential work of school boards is available as a toolkit online, and we encourage you to take a look there. I mentioned kind of the significance of one of our webinars, the open meetings law that all board members need to familiarize themselves with. And, you will find that there are some veteran members that may not have a full understanding of that law. And it really is critical. In fact, the state where I was working a year ago, had a board chair and a board vice chair arrested, literally arrested by the police for violating the open meetings law in that state. And I would encourage you to pay special attention to that, because it really does help the board stay transparent and accountable to the community. Though all of our previous webinars for a span of time are archived on the VSBA website. And so you'll have these links in a resource in an email to you. I do want to share again, there really is no end of very important topics for a new school board member. One of the last things we want to do is just fire hose people with a lot of information, and because that doesn't help anyone. So the goal tonight would be to kind of help create a scaffold for future learning and to whet appetite for future learning. So a week from tonight, we have at the same time a webinar that's going to be presented by some professionals, experts from across the state, as well as 1 or 2 board chairs on budgeting and financial oversight. And you'll get an overview of how public education funding works in the state. And that'll be very important, very insightful. Some of you may know quite a bit about it already, and some may not know anything about it. I share this background image here. This is a picture I took 3 years ago on a trek to Everest Base Camp in Nepal. And as we were trekking up, it was the time in May where base camp was being closed because you're not allowed to climb Mount Everest after a certain date because the weather gets more and more difficult. And you'll notice the people in the picture are carrying some heavy loads. I was intrigued by this. We would see people that might be carrying as much as 100 kilos, more than their own body weight. And they would do that with their back, their legs, their neck. I mean, it was phenomenal. It was almost like you're watching a firefighter drill or testing happening. I heard it said a couple different ways this evening, primarily in my breakout group, but our kids have had a rough couple of years. So have our teachers. So have our principals, so have our superintendents, so have our families, and certainly our school board members. In fact, you might even be part of this webinar tonight, newly serving on a board because someone else kind of threw in the towel and said, I just don't want to deal with this anymore. I want to encourage you to, wherever you go and whatever you do in your school board service, always recognize that people around you are carrying a heavy load. And no matter what you're dealing with from one time to the next, there's always someone carrying a heavier load than you are. And so, be patient, be kind, be respectful one of each other, and help your superintendents, help them carry their load and be successful. Ultimately, I like to tell boards and superintendents that you're mutually responsible for each other's success. The board can't do it alone. The superintendent can't do it alone. You really have to do it together. And finally, there's my name. I apologize. I don't have an 802 cell phone number yet. My phone number is 512-796-3567. And you're welcome to call and leave a message or send a text to that number as well. And then my email address on the screen, very convenient for many people, is just pgore, Pgore @vtvsba.org. And so we hope you enjoyed this webinar and have some takeaways from it. We also are always trying to improve everything that we do. And so Carrie will send with an email a questionnaire that can give us some feedback on how this webinar met your needs and then what suggestions you have for improvement in the future. And we would appreciate that. Sue, any last word?
I don't think I have any last words other than we're looking forward to seeing everyone next week. And we hope that you got a lot out of this webinar. I know even I got something out of it, and I've been doing this for a long time. So thank you very much, Phil.
Thank you, Sue. I'm going to stop our recording, and if a few people would like to stay and talk, I've got a few minutes. The dogs are still barking downstairs, but we appreciate each of you and thank you for your school board service.